expressed are those of the host, guests, and callers, not necessarily those of News Radio 1040 WHO.
We get an opportunity during this hour to chat with Congressman Ron Paul. Dr. Paul is on the road running for the office of President of the United States. And welcome back to Iowa, sir.
Thank you, Jan. Good to be with you.
Last time I saw you was a couple of weekends ago. You were participating in one of these open forums in South Carolina, and you did very well in South Carolina. It was interesting. One of the questions that was asked, the premise was, I think it was from Robbie George. He said, "Hey, about 40% of the American public doesn't pay income taxes now." And they're exempt from paying income taxes. And how are we going to remedy that situation? And your response was, that's a good start.
I think he said something like 49 or 59. I says, well, we're halfway there.
Yeah.
that's our goal.
Well, how is the government going to pay its bills if people don't pay taxes?
Well, you'd have to have a government that's very much smaller than it is now, and that wouldn't be too difficult if we had people taking seriously the Constitution, because most of what we do is not authorized in the Constitution. So you could drastically reduce the size and scope of government. But it's not like it's a brand new idea. I didn't invent that idea. The founders invented it. We didn't undo the original intent of the Constitution until 1913. You know, that's when income tax came in. Of course, it was going to be very small, and just a few people would pay a little bit.
And you're talking about the 16th Amendment?
Yeah, the 16th Amendment passed in 1913. And
I would challenge that notion. I don't
think
it
about
actually
passed. It was really passed.
Yes, but we'll probably
they
not
act
win.
as if it's passed. If you don't obey it, they punish you like it was
We will
passed.
probably lose that. We won't lose the history, but we'll lose the argument because they don't care if it didn't pass or not. There's too much edifice built upon it.
They have all the guns to enforce it.
Yes. Well, it's interesting to go back and look at the debate, what led up to the 16th Amendment. It was started as a joke. The guy who introduced it, I can't remember, I should have reviewed this before I started this conversation, but the guy who introduced it did it to be snotty. And he thought, well, these guys out there advocating all this stuff, I'm just going to introduce it and see what happens. And to his shock, his own party joined in this, and they literally had the slogan, "Soak the rich." That was their slogan to get the 16th Amendment passed.
Sounds like they're still trying to do that.
Yes. and I thought when yesterday Obama says, this is not class war, this is math. Talk to me about that, because the president spoke about a half an hour yesterday with his plan, or at least his notions of a plan. Evaluate it for us.
Well, I've argued it is math too, but I don't know which math he's using, because he must not think deficits have any consequence, because the math is that we spend a lot more money than that we take in. And therefore, if he's concerned about the mathing, adding it up, we should be doing something about it. And our economy is so weak, and actually revenues are going down because of that. But to put a greater burden on the economy and people who do produce jobs by raising taxes, the problem gets worse. And that's pretty simple math as well. But we have to decide whether we want big government or not. And so far, the side that has wanted bigger government, whether it's overseas spending or domestic spending, they've been winning. Except now we're in the midst of a great debate going on. So the grassroots have risen. You know, they're rising up and saying, look, the debt is too big. You have to quit. I don't care what you people think in Washington. I'm talking, you know, about the Tea Party people who are speaking outside of the political system. And they don't all conclude exactly what to do, but they conclude correctly that the math is wrong and we can't continue with the math that we use in Washington.
Well, the president says, hey, we can fix this if everybody does and pays their fair share. What's a fair share?
Mm-hmm. Well, to me, on income, I don't like the income tax, because that means that the government owns our income and they allow us to keep a certain proportion. So that principle is so wrong. If I had to say that, you know, if we taxed everybody at the very same rate, total taxation, between 5 and 10% should pay our bills, and nobody would complain about it.
Somebody might.
Yeah, maybe somebody. And the justified complaint would be, well, if you can justify the 5 or 10%, what's going to keep it from 12 and 15?
Exactly.
And the inevitable growth of government.
Well, just like the income tax when it was first introduced, it was designed only to soak the rich, go after the people at the top. Now it gets everybody in the top half anyway, the top 2/3 anyway.
And even if most of the revenue do come from the rich, if they get overly burdensome, it hurts the poor because the poor lose their jobs. It is true that the lower 50% of the population don't pay, but they're also suffering the most, and they have to depend on the government taking care of them. So it's a cycle. They undermine the economy. They don't tax the poor. They keep taxing the rich, and then the rich go overseas, and the country gets poorer, and that's what we're facing. And because we got away with it for 30 or 40, 50 years, and we were consuming wealth, and we were using a pretty good credit rating, we were able to do this for a long time. But time's running out on us now, and I think today the IMF just again downrated our economy. Not that they're the most reliable rating agency,
right.
or I don't want to take direction from them, but I think it's significant that it has to be pretty bad for the IMF to come in and tell even the United States, look, your economy's in shambles and it's getting worse.
Well, the Greek economy is hanging by a thread, and it looks like we, the United States and the U.S. taxpayers, are supposed to help bail them out. Yesterday, Italy was declared very, very shaky. Most of the EU countries and their currency, and the euro is apparently on borrowed time. What does that mean for the dollar? What does that mean for us?
Well, so far, it hasn't been tremendously harmful to the dollar, although if you look over the last 50, 60 years, the dollar has gone down in purchasing power, even in relationship to other currencies. Since the crisis hit in 2008, it hasn't, precipitously dropped. But the dollar is still looked at as a haven because we have a military power. We're perceived as being very wealthy. We do still have wealth in this country in spite of the weakness. But most of the perceived wealth is based on debt. So the struggle right now is who's going to bail out the next person. So even now, as you mentioned, we're over in Europe in the discussions, and it looks like we will participate, which I've always predicted, in bailing out Greece and all of Europe. But how long can this go on? That puts all the burden on the dollar, and we can continue to create new dollars. It'll be interesting to see what happens today and tomorrow. The Fed is meeting right now to decide what the next QE is going to look like, quantitative easing. How are they going to inflate, and how are they going to manipulate interest rates to allow the business community to think that they're going to get a bailout? And the markets will respond in a couple of days, and it'll be over. But the burden will be put on the dollar, which means eventually the American people suffer because the purchasing power of the dollar is going down a lot more so than they want to admit.
I was watching with a great deal of interest a dust-up you had with Bill O'Reilly on the Fox News the other day, because he thinks, he's one of those gold bugs. You're one of those guys who think we ought to have a gold standard and that we got to get rid of the fiat currency. And he sent one of his guys over there to do an ambush interview on you. And it didn't work out too well because you had really good answers for this. But Bill O'Reilly said, hey, we had to go. Nixon had to take us off the gold standard in 1971 because we're now an international currency, and you can't have an international currency that's based on gold.
Yeah.
And he said the Constitution doesn't have anything to say about this.
Yeah. One time I was on his program, and I brought up the subject of a historic precedent, and to make my point.
Mm-hmm.
He don't want to hear anything about history. So I guess he doesn't want to hear anything about the Constitution either. So.
Well, I started digging around in this, and the way I understand it is that Nixon was inflating the currency to have guns and butter, pretty much the way we're doing now, but at a lesser degree. But he was inflating the currency, and the French said, hey, if you're going to do that, we want gold rather than dollars.
That's right.
And Nixon said, nope, can't do that.
We ran out. So, did we
literally run out? Were we actually shipping
we
gold?
couldn't have maintained it. We had over 500 million ounces and went down to 262 is what we theoretically have right now. No, it was over 700. We gave up about 500 million ounces.
Before he slammed the gold
before
window.
he says, we have to close it, because countries do that because they always cling to, even though they deny its money, they really, cling to their gold. But this was not a surprise for what Nixon did, because Henry Hazlitt, who was a good Austrian journalist back then, who was a friend of von Mises, when Bretton Woods came out in 1945, which was the pseudo-gold standard, where the dollar was to be linked to gold at $35 an ounce, Hazlitt said, it's not going to work. This will just give license to the United States government to print money and inflate. And they did, until the point where the French and others said, hey, we have too many dollars. We'd rather have your gold. To me, the amazing thing is that this paper system, this world system that people believe would work without anything behind it, has lasted this long. But in the last 4 or 5 years, I think people are beginning to realize that we're on its last legs, and they're scurrying around on what's going to replace it.
Well, when we come back here in just a moment, we'll take calls from listeners who are involved in this. Folks, we are in the middle of a presidential race. Ron Paul has a very high profile in this race, much to the chagrin of many people in the mainstream of the party. And he came into a close second with Michelle Bachmann in our own Iowa straw poll a few weeks ago. And I want you to be part of this interview and this conversation, too. I always have my own favorite questions and areas that I like to hear Ron Paul speak about, and I suspect you do too. So be part of it at 284-1040 or 800-469-4295 in just a moment.